Part 1. Purposeless Mornings. Daniel woke up to another morning in the city, indistinguishable from the rest, filled with honking cars, unread notifications, and a lingering sense of emptiness that refused to fade. At 28, he had a stable job in the creative industry, a decent income, and a small but comfortable apartment. On paper, Daniel was fine, but inside, everything was unraveling. Each morning, he stared into the mirror and saw no one. The excitement of his college years was gone, as was the drive from his early days at work. He once believed success meant achieving what others envied: fame, a good salary, LinkedIn-worthy accomplishments. And yet, the higher he climbed, the more lost he felt. Every meeting felt like a performance he had to force himself through. Every completed project left a new void. Friends drifted in different directions. Some started families, others left their jobs to study abroad, some simply vanished without a trace. Daniel stayed, caught in a cycle he no longer understood. Some evenings after work, he sat in his car for hours, unable to leave the parking lot. The radio played, his phone buzzed incessantly, but he had no desire to answer. His mind was blank. No ideas, no motivation, no dreams. Whose life am I living? The question looped in his mind, persistent like a sad song with no end. Then one day, Emma, an old college friend, sent him a brief message. "There's a place I once visited, a few hours from the city, no phone signal, no schedule. But there, I heard my own voice again." Daniel didn't reply immediately. But that night, instead of losing himself in Netflix or emails, he began searching for images of monasteries. The photos appeared, simple, serene, and strangely calming to his heart. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without needing background music. Part 2. Days of Stillness. Daniel arrived at the monastery on a drizzly afternoon. The wooden gate opened in silence. No boisterous welcome, no check-in instructions. Only an elderly monk standing by a blooming bougainvillea, its petals falling, nodding gently as he saw Daniel. "I'm Daniel," he said, slightly awkward, as if he'd stepped into a place more sacred than he was allowed. The monk only smiled. "We knew you'd come." From that day, Daniel entered a rhythm of life entirely unlike anything he'd known. A rhythm he would have called boring if he'd only seen it from the outside. Each day began at 4 a.m. A soft bell rang through the mist, not jarring, but enough to stir him awake. Daniel stepped out from under his blanket, barefoot on the cool ground, and joined the monks in sweeping the courtyard. At first, he found it absurd. Why wake so early just to sweep leaves that the wind would scatter again? But gradually, he realized it wasn't about sweeping the courtyard. It was about clearing the mind. Each slow movement, each breath in sync with the task. No one spoke while working. Everyone focused, as if every leaf carried a lesson in presence. The first meal left Daniel puzzled. Everyone sat cross-legged in a circle, each with a bowl of plain rice and simple dishes, steamed vegetables, miso soup, a piece of tofu. No one spoke, no one checked their phones, no background music, just the sound of spoons touching bowls and the faint rustle of chewing, like a breeze. Time seemed to slow. Each bite tasted more distinct. Daniel realized that for years he'd eaten while working, watching movies, or scrolling online. He'd never truly tasted his food. A young monk later whispered, "Eating in silence is an act of gratitude, not just for the food, but for this moment." There were no supervisors at the monastery, no cameras, no one forcing Daniel to wake on time or work diligently. Yet everyone followed the schedule with an almost sacred willingness. Daniel began to feel uneasy when he overslept or rushed through tasks. No one scolded him, but the monk's calm gazes were enough to make him reflect on himself. He understood. Discipline wasn't about restricting freedom. It was the path to inner freedom. When small tasks like folding blankets, sweeping the courtyard, or eating were done with full awareness, he felt in control of his life, something he once thought only successful people had. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the monastery glowed under soft oil lamps. No Netflix, no work emails, no Zoom calls. Daniel expected boredom, but it never came. He began to write, not for social media or an audience, but to understand himself. He read, not self-help or business books, but texts about stillness, impermanence, and letting go of the unnecessary. Each evening, he meditated with the monks. At first, his mind was a flock of chaotic birds, but after a few days, a new stillness began to take root, quiet but profound. There were no lengthy sermons, no complex philosophies. All Daniel learned came from the repetition of simple acts: waking early, sweeping the courtyard, eating in silence, working with heart. He once thought changing his life required grand decisions, but here, he learned, it's the small, consistent, mindful acts that reshape who you are. Part 3. The Power of Small Repetitions. One morning, as Daniel swept the courtyard, Master Tenzin approached him. He watched for a long moment before asking gently, "What do you see when you sweep this courtyard every day?" Daniel wiped his brow, hesitating. "I'm not sure. Sometimes it feels like a waste of time, but other times, it feels peaceful." Tenzin smiled, leaning on his staff, gazing at the trees swaying in the breeze. That's the power of repetition. When the mind is still, even the smallest action becomes a sacred ritual. Back in the city, Daniel had believed life changed through big decisions: a career leap, a new relationship, a faraway trip. But the longer he stayed at the monastery, the more he saw. It's the small, intentional, repeated actions that truly shape a person. Folding the blanket each morning, washing dishes by hand, meditating for 15 minutes before meals, writing 3 lines in a journal before bed. At first, these tasks felt mundane, but one day, while washing dishes, Daniel realized he was fully present. No thoughts of unanswered emails, no worries about future plans, just his hands feeling the warm water, each dish placed down with care, as if it held its own value. One afternoon, Daniel asked Tenzin, "How can I find more peace? I still worry about the future." Tenzin looked at him, then pointed to a young bamboo shoot by the temple. "That bamboo grows just a few millimeters each day. You don't see it growing, but a year later it's taller than a person. Peace is like that. It doesn't come in a rush. It comes from what you repeat daily." Daniel fell silent. He'd once sought peace as something to chase, through courses, trips, or achievements. But here, peace wasn't a destination. It was the natural outcome of a rhythmic, mindful life. Daniel once confessed he struggled to stay focused. In the city, he jumped from task to task, starting one project while fretting about the next, opening social media before finishing a chapter of a book. Tenzin didn't respond immediately. The next day, he took Daniel to a plot behind the temple and asked him to dig a hole for planting a tree. "Just one spot. Don't dig anywhere else." Daniel dug diligently. 10 minutes later, his arms tired, he suggested, "Maybe we should try that spot over there. The soil looks softer." Tenzin shook his head. "If you keep digging a little here and there, you'll never go deep enough for roots." Daniel understood. His mind was the same, always shifting, never deep enough in anything. Focus didn't come from fleeting inspiration, but from sitting down, day after day, and staying with one thing. One evening, as mountain winds blew, Daniel meditated in silence. The question still lingered. What am I living for? No one answered it for him. But he noticed that since repeating simple acts, sweeping, meditating, writing, washing dishes, the emptiness was gone. There was a quiet purpose in these seemingly meaningless tasks. Like a gardener who doesn't shout, "I love this plant," but waters it daily. Purpose wasn't something to find. It was created by living mindfully in each small act. Before leaving the monastery, Daniel looked at the path he'd walked daily, from his room to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the meditation hall. The stones beneath his feet were unchanged, but his steps were different. No longer rushed, no longer searching. Just the gentle repetition of what mattered most, the small things he'd once overlooked. Part 4. Redefining Success. Daniel sat on the stone steps leading to the meditation hall, watching the sunset. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky, like the thoughts in his mind, quiet but profound. He thought back to his old life, a young, ambitious man in New York City. He'd once believed success meant a high-paying job, an expensive apartment, and a reputation that commanded respect. He lived for validation from his boss, colleagues, even strangers on social media. But at the monastery, where no one knew his name or cared about his credentials, Daniel had to face himself. In the city, he'd had glamorous parties and inspiring speeches, But there was always a hidden emptiness. When the stage lights dimmed and the applause faded, he felt profoundly alone. "Something's off," he once told a close friend. "I have everything I wanted, but it doesn't feel enough." At the monastery, there were no deadlines, no emails, no external measures of worth. At first, Daniel felt unmoored. But the silence and simplicity gradually opened an inner space, where his true voice began to speak. During one meditation, he recalled a childhood memory, a summer afternoon when young Daniel drew under a tree, not for praise or reward, but because it made him feel alive. And he understood, true success wasn't about grand achievements, but living each day true to what made him feel alive. One afternoon, Daniel asked Tenzin, "How do I know I'm living by my core values?" Tenzin poured tea, handed Daniel a cup, and said, "When you no longer need to boast, prove, or justify, and still feel you're living fully, then you're living your true values." The words rang like a bell in Daniel's heart. From then on, he asked himself each night before bed, "Did I live today according to what truly matters to me?" Gradually, his answers shifted. No longer, "What great thing did I achieve?" but "Did I take time to listen to someone? Did I do something kind, even if no one noticed? Was I honest with myself?" And strangely, by living closer to these values, he felt lighter, more focused, more grounded, even without applause or recognition. One morning, while washing dishes, Daniel smiled to himself and said, "I've run so far just to find my way back to myself." Now, success was no longer a destination to chase. It was a way of living, aligned with his true values. Success was sleeping soundly, knowing he didn't have to pretend to be anyone else. Success was smiling at himself, even if no one saw. Success was living by the truth in his heart, not the world's expectations. On his way back to modern life, Daniel no longer craved the spotlight. He still worked, still contributed, but not for applause. He did it because it was right for his heart. And perhaps, in that moment, he was truly successful. Part 5. Returning, but not the same. As the plane landed in his old city, Daniel gazed out the window. Skyscrapers, bustling traffic, flickering lights, all familiar. But inside, something had shifted. Gone was the urge to be swept up in the frantic pace. He carried a quiet space within him, planted by the monastery. This time, he wasn't the same man, the one who raced against time to finish projects, feared missing opportunities, and felt empty without attention. He returned with a new mindset, slower, observant, intentional. Daniel started with small changes. Waking 15 minutes earlier to meditate, sipping tea in silence, and writing 3 things he was grateful for in his journal. He practiced moving slowly, not just in his steps, but in his thoughts and reactions. When an angry email or unsettling message arrived, he took 3 deep breaths instead of reacting instantly. Gradually, emotional waves became easier to observe, no longer controlling him. At work, he stopped chasing every opportunity. He chose selectively, focusing on one question: does this align with my values? Friends and colleagues noticed the change. He was still diligent, but now he was fully present in conversations. When someone shared a struggle, he didn't rush to offer solutions. He listened with his heart. "You've changed," a close friend said. Daniel smiled lightly. "Not really. I'm just living closer to myself." Modern life wasn't easy. There were still stressful days, unexpected challenges, but now Daniel didn't try to escape or fight them. He accepted them, as he'd learned in the meditation hall, as part of the journey. With an awake heart, he no longer tried to control everything. He learned to live with life's rhythm without losing himself. And perhaps that was the monastery's greatest gift: inner freedom, right in the midst of everyday life.